What's up, football fans? Welcome to a Thursday episode of the Call Sheet Daily Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Smith. Beautiful spring day again. The weather's turning, man, and that's exciting. And the football season is not really upon us, but it never really sleeps. We got plenty to talk about with the draft less than a month away now. We're right about a month away, I should say. And NFL teams are out and about scouting college prospects. A lot of pro days going on. And that's our topic today. And our topic really centers on a headline I saw last night as I was making some notes for today's show. I saw a headline that read 8 Ohio State players who improved their draft stock at Wednesday's pro day. Right? 8 Ohio State players who improved their draft stock at Wednesday's pro day. And that headline jumped out at me because it essentially operates under the assumption that what goes on at these pro days, that these workouts, that these sort of football sessions in shorts really do have an impact on the draft stock of prospects. So it's either that you really believe that these pro days do impact where guys are going to be drafted, or it's just a clickbait article. It could be either or. You never know, right? But I found it interesting, and I wanted to dive into the question of, do these workouts matter? Can we separate fact from fiction in regard to these workouts? Now, I was at the NFL Combine back at the end of February, early March. Got to see a lot of this stuff unfolding up close and personal. I do think that there are some things in which you can put some value. But I also think there's a lot of it that's a whole bunch of nothing. And that if you are going to parse every detail, if you're going to look at every single result, every player's result for every little thing they do, and you're going to analyze whether or not that's impacting their draft stock, I think you're making a mistake. So let's talk about this, man. What really matters? Depending on your position group, what are the numbers that we should be looking at? What are the test results that we should be evaluating and critiquing? And what can we throw out? So here's what traditionally you get tested in at a pro day or at the combine. They take your height and your weight. They measure your hand size. They measure the length of your arm and your wingspan. They clock you in the 40. And in doing so, they then publish your splits at 10 yards and at 20 yards. They test you in the vertical jump or vertical leap, in the broad jump, and then in the 3-cone and shuttle drills, which are change of direction drills. And you bench press max reps at 225 pounds. Now, that's all the physical testing stuff. And then, of course, you meet with coaches. And you have interviews and one-on-ones, and they like to get the quarterbacks onto the board. And, of course, there's field drills for the skill position players. QBs, wide receivers throwing, etc. Does all of it matter for all prospects? Well, no, it doesn't. It doesn't. Do you really care about the 40 time of a 315-pound offensive tackle? Well, if he runs 7 seconds, you care. But if he's running 5 flat versus 5.2, it's not really that big a deal. So what matters? What matters for linemen, right? Let's look at these different groups and highlight what really matters. Offensive and defensive linemen. What are the things that really matter? Well, coaches and scouts really like to take into account length. And here's why. Because when you're playing inside, when you're playing on the line, one of the big determinants as to whether or not you win a rep is first contact. Who makes first contact? My guest on yesterday's show, Dan Bogacheski, offensive line coach here in Southern New Jersey, talked a lot about first strike. That the battle to win first strike is really important up front because it's oftentimes going to dictate who wins leverage. And so the longer you are, the better your opportunity to either win first strike because you can strike from further away. You don't have to be as close to make contact. And also, you have a greater ability now to gain separation. Your ability to strike and extend keeps that player further away from you. And if you're an offensive lineman in particular, you're trying to create space between you and the defender. Why do people stress length in left tackles? Because the left tackle's job is to keep edge rushers off of the blind side of the quarterback, most of whom are right-handed. And the longer you are, man, the more you can extend and increase the width of that edge, right? Make it a longer edge that defender has to turn, has to navigate, has to bend in order to get to the quarterback. That's an advantage for you. So arm length and wingspan is something that really matters, in particular for offensive linemen. And while I'm not a huge proponent of the bench press as a great measurable for any football player, because if you think about it, in theory, what are you being asked to do when you bench press? You're being asked to lay down on your back and move weight off of your chest. And if you're ever physically in that position on a football field, that's a bad thing. You don't ever want to be in a position on a football field where you're lying on your back with dudes on top of you, especially as a lineman. That means you've been pancaked. So that's not a great measurable, but it does measure your ability to move force from a coiled position to an extended position. And that is what linemen do. And in particular, defensive linemen want to get as close to an offensive lineman as they can and then strike and extend. And so the bench press, while I wouldn't consider it to be the greatest measurable, is important to look at for defensive linemen in particular because you want to measure their ability to violently move force from a constricted area and extend it away from the body. That replicates, in theory, what they do on a football field. So, arm length, wingspan, ability to move force via the bench press, etc. For offensive and defensive linemen, those are good drills or measurables, I should say, to look at. What about linebackers and running backs? Well, what is the nature of those positions? What are linebackers and running backs doing? Well, they're moving in tight and confined spaces. They need to be able to change direction. Linebackers have to be able to move forward on run plays, to move backward on passing plays, to move sideline to sideline horizontally. They have to have great vertical movement. They have to have great horizontal movement. Do you want your linebackers to be fast? Of course. But is the 40 the best way to measure that? It is not. The drills, I think, that are really relevant for linebackers and for running backs, because if you flip us over onto the offensive side of the ball, running backs have to do similar things, with the exception of backpedaling and moving backwards. But they have to have that side-to-side movement. They have to have that quick change of direction. They got to have horizontal and vertical movement. And so, for linebackers and running backs, you should put a lot of stock in the 3-cone and the shuttle drills. Because what do the 3-cone and the shuttle drills measure? Those same things. Change of direction, quick twitch, vertical speed, horizontal speed. While the 40 matters, right? You don't want your running back running a 4.9 40. That's just slow. While the 40 matters, I think the 10 and the 20 splits are really important too, because again, how quickly can that back get to full speed? What kind of a burst do they have? Hey, if they have long speed, that's great. But man, if they break off 3 or 4 40-plus yard runs in the course of a season, that's great. running backs aren't breaking off long runs on a regular basis, but they're doing an awful lot of stuff in a confined space in 10 and 20-yard increments. What about D-backs and wide receivers? Well, now the longer speed plays more into the equation. There's a lot of vertical routes, man. There's a lot of DBs that have to be able to cover a lot of ground in a short period of time. And so the 40 does matter. When a DB or a wide receiver runs a 4.3, that opens eyes because that long speed translates to what they do in a game. And the vertical jump and the broad jump, they matter as well because they measure explosiveness. You want your wide receivers and your defensive backs to be explosive. You want them to be able to go up and get jump balls. You want them to be able to from a standing position or a near standing position, explode as quickly as possible. If you're a wide receiver, the faster you can break down the cushion of a D-back, the better you're going to be. You're going to be able to get open quicker. And if you're a defensive back, the opposite is true. The longer you can maintain that cushion, the better. And so your ability to go from a stationary position, let's say your stance, into a back pedal at full speed or into a sprint at full speed quickly is a huge measurable for you. So yeah, man, 40-yard dash, important at that position or those positions, more so than any other group. What about quarterbacks? Well, let's talk about hand size, the great Kenny Pickett debate. Because a couple of years ago when Kenny Pickett was coming out of the University of Pittsburgh, there was a lot of talk about his hand size. His hands are small. He's not going to be able to be a good quarterback in the NFL. Well, so far, Kenny Pickett has struggled some in the NFL, but I think that the reasons for that are not directly related to his hand size. I think that one can be overblown. Drew Brees had small hands. He's in the Hall of Fame. Ideally, would you like your quarterback to have big hands, particularly if he's playing in Buffalo or a place like that where the weather's bad? Well, of course. But there are so many other measurables that you should put in front of hand size when evaluating quarterbacks. So what they do on the field matters. Their arm strength, their mobility, their ability to make lots of different throws from lots of different arm angles and platforms, etc. Yes, that really matters. On-field workout matters. But, and I've been told this by several excellent sources, NFL coaches, scouts, etc. With quarterbacks, the thing that matters just as much, if not more, are the interviews. When you get an opportunity to sit down with these guys one-on-one and talk to them, that really matters. Why? Because this guy's going to be the leader of your offense, the face of your franchise. This guy's got to be able to command a huddle of grown men. He's got to be the alpha. He's got to understand the playbook inside out. He's got to make decisions at the line of scrimmage in high-pressure situations. And you need to make sure that you're comfortable with who he is as a person, with his ability to process that information, with his understanding of the playbook, with his ability to deal with men. So more than any other position at quarterback, the interview, the whiteboard session, that really matters. So we've seen a lot of teams have their pro days this week. I mentioned Ohio State. Ohio State had 17 guys test at their pro day on Wednesday. And if we refer back to that article, eight Buckeyes who improved their draft stock. Does it really matter what some of them did? Well, I think to a degree it does. I think it matters that Will Howard, this is unbelievable that we're actually charting this statistic, that I can even quote this statistic is unbelievable. But I think it matters that Will Howard completed 65 out of 67 throws at his on-field workout on Wednesday. And the two he didn't complete were drops by his receivers. And why does that matter? Because he kind of struggled at the combine. He didn't have a great showing at the combine, and the thought was, well, look, man, Will Howard just led Ohio State to a national championship. And most NFL scouts and teams feel like they have a pretty good idea of who he is as a quarterback and maybe where he should be drafted. But when he has a poor combine, you'd like to see him bounce back at his pro day. And by all accounts, he did. Ashton Jeanty at Boise State's pro day on Monday didn't run the 40, but looked phenomenal going through drills. Does that matter? I don't know. You got a huge body of evidence, a huge body of work on Ashton Jeanty. Don't we have a pretty good idea who Ashton Jeanty is by now? Does seeing Ashton Jeanty with his shirt off, going through some bag drills, change our opinion of him? I don't know, man. I think Ashton Jeanty's a guy for whom the jury's in on who he is as a football player. I think one of the interesting ones was LSU offensive tackle Will Campbell, who was asked about his arm length at LSU's pro day. Will Campbell's arm length came out to be a little bit shorter, 32 5/8 inches. A little bit shorter. You know, the magic number for offensive tackles is 33. Like, you want their arm length to be like 33 inches at a minimum. And I thought Will Campbell had a great quote at the podium. This is a guy who's 6'6" and 320 pounds. He was a first-team All-American. He's been a starter for a couple years at LSU. And he said, nobody asked me about my arm length when I was making all SEC and All-American. And then suddenly I measure a quarter of an inch shorter than everybody wants me to be. And now there's a question about whether or not I'm a good football player. I don't give a damn about any of that. Good for Will Campbell, man. I mean, sometimes it does matter, right? I remember Peter Skoronski coming out of Northwestern a couple years ago as an offensive tackle, and his arm length was like 32 inches. And that was sort of a full inch shorter than you really would like to see in an offensive tackle. And there were legitimate questions about, hey, is this guy an NFL offensive tackle? And the Titans drafted him and they moved him to guard, and he's become an excellent guard for the Titans. Maybe his length was better suited for guard. But when you're looking at a guy like Will Campbell, who's 6'6", and he's been an All-American, and he's less than a quarter of an inch from the ideal mark, or he's about a quarter of an inch from the ideal mark that you'd like in your arm length, put your stock in the film. So let's wrap it up. Do these pro day workouts, do these measurables matter? Well, I think the truth is that some of them matter based upon the position group you're evaluating. And if you want to use these measurables as a way to validate what you've seen on film, or maybe if you have a question about a guy and you want to use it as a way to sort of nudge your evaluation of him in one direction or another, then yeah, they matter. But man, for everybody who's going to look at Matthew Golden because he ran a 4.29 in the 40 and say that guy should be drafted in the first half of the first round because he ran a 4.29, you're missing the bigger picture. It's about more than the measurables. And if you think the measurables matter more than the film, I think you're making a mistake. All right. This is all good stuff because tomorrow on the show, I'm going to have as my guest, Fritz Hastings. Fritz Hastings has been training football players and athletes for 6 decades. Fritz Hastings started training athletes in weight training in the 1970s. In the 1970s, if your high school had like a Nautilus machine or your college had a couple of benches and squat racks thrown in a dank basement somewhere, that was a lot. And Fritz was on the ground training guys before the overwhelming majority of programs across America had even gotten to the idea of weight training as a way to improve performance. And we're going to talk to Fritz on tomorrow's show about what he's learned over 6 decades. How did he begin training athletes? What did that look like in the 1970s? What's it look like today? How has it evolved over time? It's going to be an awesome conversation. So join me tomorrow for really a follow-up on today's discussion about training athletes with Fritz Hastings. Until then, man, everybody have a great day. Enjoy the weather in your part of America.